Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Source. Have a real treat for you today, talking about one of what could be the most important books in the All-In era at DC. My pleasure to welcome Ram V back to the show. Ram, glad to have you.
Thanks so much, Jace. Nice to be back talking to you.
Yeah, so we talked at San Diego Comic-Con about New Gods and how important it was going to be to everything that's going on with Darkseid. You know, we saw what happened in the All-In special and what have you. I've had the chance to read the first issue now, and it's both what I expected, but yet wildly different. So you mentioned
Mm.
at San Diego about how much it was going to be about family, um, but I almost got a sense of reading the first issue of this idea of fractured family versus found family. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that and how that's going to play out in terms of dramatic tension?
Yeah, to kind of really hone in on the point you're making, what we're really talking about Scott Free, who at this point has two families, one that he belongs to by nature of his origin, and yet one that threw him to the wolves when he was a child,
Right.
one that he has now formed and made for himself on Earth, where he aspires to essentially live a quieter life than he's been used to in the past. And yet, you know, your past, your origins have a way of catching up with you, as we see in this first issue. So really, for him, it is very much that question of which family do I participate in, and do I really get to make that choice?
And really, it kind of expanding on that, I feel like that sort of reflects where we are in the DC universe as a whole, which I find so interesting with this idea of Justice League Unlimited, with this
Mm.
with what Mark Waid is doing with Dan Mora, and how everybody's a part of the group, right? Everybody's part of the family, and we need to be vigilant and make sure things like the Absolute Power event can't happen again. But yet
Yeah.
we go back at the beginning of your issue and we see some of the earliest beginnings of the universe. So it's kind of playing that same thing, old versus new on a grander scale. Is that something that you want to
Mhm.
kind of explore as well?
Yeah, we're not really going back in time. We're seeing an entity that has been present since the very
Right, right.
beginning of all creation, who it seems to us for unexplained reasons witnesses Darkseid's sundering, and ends up knowing that her time has come. And I think to me, it represents it's a way of going back to that sort of old Kirby line, the old gods died and the new gods were born. To me, it seems like a way of remembering that again and going like things change, old eras fall down, old kingdoms are broken, and then from the ashes, new things arise. And it felt like a way to talk about the sort of greater all-in absolute universe formative events. The old order is gone and the new order has to rise, and I think we're seeing the beginnings of that happening, as far as the new gods corner of the DCU is concerned. But also, as a opening note, it lets me suggest that, look, it's all connected. Darkseid died in this sort of DCU mainstream event, and the source made a prophecy in the fourth world. And therefore, we start to, I think it sets the note for the readers in terms of looking at these things not as different groups of characters cloistered in their own pockets, rather as one thing, one grand mythology where everything matters and everything has consequences.
Yeah, and again, it was something you mentioned before about how we're going to see, like Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman and some other characters come in because, what's going to be happening in the New Gods book is going to affect, a lot of the greater DCU. And that's what's so interesting because these events happen as, you mentioned this being that's been around forever.
Yeah.
And since his Darkseid's death and everything that comes from that. So it feels like we're building to something momentous. But the thing is, the most of the heroes of the DCU aren't even aware that this is going on. So we're building to that, to their discovery of, oh crap, it's going to hit the fan.
Yeah, I think I think when that moment arrives, and it won't be too long before it arrives, but when that moment arrives, there will very much be a sense of, oh crap. And it will be less a case of the proverbial bleep hitting the fan. It will be more a case of the fan is falling down upon us from the sky. And so I think, yeah, I'm pretty excited to write that. Actually, interestingly, just yesterday, I was talking to Evan about the visual sequence for that event, and what is the moment that sets it all off. And he was like, genuinely had goose pimples on his hand when we were discussing
Awesome.
it. So, yeah.
Well, the other part of this, with the sense that the heroes don't know, but also we as readers aren't exactly sure, who this ancient being is and how it all plays in. There's a sense of mystery to the story that I wasn't necessarily expecting. That was the thing that surprised me most. Was that something that was intentional on your part? Like, it's a big chunk of story we get in the first issue, and a lot of things are set up, and we see familiar characters. You mentioned Scott Free, we see Orion, Highfather, Metron. But there's also this sense of mystery. Like, what do we're at this point, we're not even sure what we don't know yet.
Yeah, and also like I wanted to establish this idea that if you've tasted the soup that was New Gods for all of these years, like this is a whole other dish, and you're going to get unexpected things. You're going to get unexpected characters and flavors, and so the mystery element was a part of that endeavor. But also, I think I kind of wanted to expand because I felt like, especially for someone like me, I believe in moving stories forward, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so it felt like, yeah, to move forward from here, we had to have this element of mystery, element of the unknown, with the new characters being presented. I'm trying not to give away spoilers. So.
Oh yeah. We don't want to spoil. And I'll just say that there is somebody new introduced that's going to be a big part of the story going forward. The last page is amazing. And kind of on that note, we should talk about Evan's art, which is just spectacular. When Orion shows up for the first page, there's almost a Will Eisner kind of feel to it with his name on the page and what have you. I know you mentioned at San Diego about always having him in mind for this book, and the new gods. We've seen them before; they look familiar, but there's also a freshness to what Evan is doing. Was that something that you two talked about? Was that just him on his own? And what's the collaboration been like? Is it exactly what you expected it to be?
Yeah, I mean, Evan's been a friend of mine long before we worked on this. We've worked on plenty of other things before. And to be very honest, I don't think either Evan or I came from a perspective of like, oh, this has to be a Jack Kirby thing. Don't get me wrong, like I knew who Jack Kirby was, and I've been a fan of his work, but by the nature of my history with comics, I never come to any book with a sense of like, oh yeah, this is the history, and therefore we must sort of adhere to this style or this aesthetic. To me, the things I really enjoyed about the original Kirby work were the sense of scale, the sense of the spectacular, and that you could turn every page and you were still discovering something new, a new idea, a new concept. And that's something that I wanted to bring to the series. But outside of that, I don't think either Evan or I were precious about like, this has to look like Kirby or it has to follow Kirby designs. If anything, Evan, I think, is bringing his more contemporary influences. Aside from sort of classic American comics, there's also Mobius in there. There's also Druyer and heavy metal and Metal Erland in there. There's also Otomo and manga aesthetics in there. So what you're seeing on the page really is a culmination of all of those influences. And then I will totally take credit for the Will Eisner-esque titles in the background because I went, look, there's going to be new readers here. And instead of doing something boring like, okay, who is Orion? We're just going to introduce the characters in situ, but we're going to tell people like that these characters are important by pasting these kind of giant titles in the background. So when you see Scott Free next, even though he's not wearing his costume, you have a sense of like, okay, this is Mr. Miracle because we see the title in the background.
Yeah, it was awesome. And the other thing that's great, we're talking about this tying in when Bart is mentioned, you do mention, hey, birds of prey and that sort of thing, which
Yeah.
harkens back to, um, when I read comics as a youth, you'd get those little editors boxes and it'd make you want to go check out, hey, why is she so tired? What's going on in Birds of Prey? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and
Uh,
also I think there's going to be cool little moments that we get to see these kind of small tie-ins because I feel like, to be honest, like people always concerned like, oh, is the big event going to derail your story? Like it doesn't have to be big. It can be these kind of small little things that are dropped that make the entire world kind of feel cohesive and coherent. So I think we're going to see that. I'm literally about to write a message to my editors to talk about, hey, let's chat John Stewart and what his status quo is, because I know he's got a role to play later on in the story as well. So we're going to see more of these characters and more of that sort of DCU connection popping up pretty regularly in the story.
Yeah, that's already, we're not that far into the All-In era, and it's already been a hallmark of it. And it's one of the things that hardcore DC fans and even casual DC fans love about the universe is that interconnectivity and how much it feels immersive. But I want to go back to something else you said before about Evan's art and the scale. Even though this is a big book and there's huge scale and his art is gorgeous, and this is the first time I'm seeing his interiors, and I'm a little disappointed I haven't seen them before just because I want more. It's just so
Sure,
amazing.
sure. Well, hey, as the book does well, you'll have an unlimited supply at least for the foreseeable future. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I'm really looking forward to it. But this idea of scale, but juxtaposed against the quiet moments that he does really
yeah,
well. Also, I'm specifically thinking of the sequence with Scott and Orion
yeah.
when they're on the bench. Oh my God, the detail, the emotion in the faces, along with the way you scripted it, that dramatic tension between the two, by far and away my favorite scene in the book. Was there any particular challenges in writing that, having them play off each other? Anything that was
No,
surprising to you about
as it
their
should be,
dynamic?
right? As it should be, because I mean, what other book do you get to do this with where you literally have like planets colliding and spaceships and lasers, and then two sort of difficult relationship brothers sat on a park bench talking about, why haven't you come visited me before? You haven't even seen
Yeah,
your niece and you're asking me to do this stuff. I feel like that's the beauty of writing this kind of story, something that has these sort of cosmic consequences, but really is about things that I hope most readers can relate to, because everyone's had that conversation. Everyone's had that sort of, whether you have a sibling or not. Like I'm reminded of the time my friend called me and said, "How come you don't call anymore? Are we not friends?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't have to call you to be friends. We could just hang out whenever." It's that kind of
yeah,
conversation, and I feel like when you have characters that can punch planets into oblivion, you kind of tend to lose track of why people care about them. And I feel like I'm glad to hear you say that moment was your favorite, because like moments like that is why people care about a book. Not no offense to Evan's sense of scale, but it's not because New Genesis is a giant floating city. It's because Orion and Scott have this complex, nuanced, beautiful relationship.
yeah. Everybody, and when you see the kind of what comes out of that conversation and the reason they're having it, oh man, like I said, it really sets up everything going forward. So really want to thank you, Ron, for taking the time to talk to me today about New Gods. You mentioned the fan literally falling from the ceiling and everything going crazy. Is that what you're most anticipating getting the fan reaction for moving forward, or is there something else in the first few issues that you can't wait for it to be out there and get kind of the reader reaction?
I mean, I could give you the moments that I'm super excited for. There's a full on Orion versus Mr. Miracle fight that happens, which I'm super excited for. I don't think I mentioned this somewhere before. While I'm a fan of Kirby, I don't think Kirby quite fleshed out what powers these new gods have. I mean, they all
Yeah.
had these lasers and superhuman strength and whatnot, and astral force and all of that. But really specifically why is Orion's powers different from Scott Free's powers different from Bardif. So we're getting to do that. And I think the first time you really see that is when Mr. Miracle and Orion sort of fight each other. And I think that's a very exciting moment for me. There's a moment where Highfather questions his place and goes, is it time for me to step down? After all, my sworn enemy is no more. Have I failed my people in some way? Is it time for somebody else to pick up the torch? So that's going to be a super interesting moment. And then there's that sort of collision between the DCU characters. So I'll say this. The moment where Superman shows up is the one that gave goose pimples to Evan as I narrated it. So I'm kind of excited to see readers react to that. And then obviously Jon Stewart showing up, Wonder Woman has a role to play. And then you'll see the new character that shows up at the end of issue 1. You'll see that the mechanism of that character kind of requires more people from the DCU to show up in this story and interact with it in interesting ways. So, I can only promise more of these kind of moments coming up soon.
That's fantastic. I mean, I've seen other DC creators talking about how amazing the book is. Everybody, if you're listening, you can hear how much is about to happen in this book. You want to jump on, you want to be on board. So again, Ram, thanks so much for talking to me. And yeah, I can't wait to see what happens next in New Gods.
If there's anything to tease, it's also that by the end of this first year of events in this storyline and in the All In and Absolute stuff, you'll see why the New Gods connect the All In and the Absolute side of things. So that's also a moment to look forward to.
Fantastic. So everybody must read. You got to be reading New Gods if you want to be immersed in the All In era of the DC universe. So thanks so much, Ram.
Thank you.